Okay, and the last person I will introduce, our Executive Director of the House Appropriations Committee staff, Ms. Ann Oman, will lead us off.
Muchísimas gracias siempre por acompañarnos aquí en la Mesa Caliente. Y bueno, lo estábamos diciendo, el presidente Donald Trump descartó una vez más a María Corina Machado para ser la líder de un cambio político en Venezuela. Pero con este contexto y esta reunión, ¿cómo la debemos de interpretar este encuentro? Lo que ella dijo, ¿lo vemos como algo positivo? ¿Podría ser ella la que realmente esté liderando Venezuela con el apoyo de Donald Trump?
Good afternoon. I'll open up with the revenue side of the picture for the budgets that you'll be considering, House Bill 29, the caboose, and House Bill 30. Looking first at the caboose bill, that is the fiscal year in which we are currently in that started last July 1. What you see in House Bill 29 is almost $3 billion above that which was included for the current fiscal year when you all passed Chapter 725 last spring. Those additional revenues are driven by two separate pots, I would say. There's $1.75 billion that are leftover revenues from fiscal year 25. This includes a actual general fund revenue surplus of about $572 million. Then there's almost $900 million available for you, resulting from the items Governor Youngkin vetoed in the budget last spring. Those were left unappropriated, so those become additional revenues available this year, as well as about $258 million of funds that were appropriated to agencies in fiscal year 25 but not spent. In addition to that $1.75 billion, there's a bit over $822 million resulting from the revenue reforecast that occurred as part of the annual reforecasting process this fall. This is driven not by any great changes in what we see the economy doing, but more of that results from having exceeded the forecast last year. So your base is higher, and so applying similar growth rates to that gives you additional money in this year. In terms of the actions the governor has proposed in terms of spending and savings, $1.75 billion, there's a bit over $822 million. That's creative. Once the governor's spending and savings have been accounted for, that leaves you about $2.1 billion at this point to carry forward into the next biennium. That's important because especially those of you who have been on the committee for a while know you never want to spend carry forward monies on ongoing activities. So while you'll have a good bit of extra money coming into the big bill, over $2 billion of that is money that you would like to limit to one-time activities to not drive up the base above sustainable levels. In terms of where we are year to date, the first column shows you the percentage growth estimates by source. The second column shows you where we are year to date. And the third, what we would have to do in the remaining 6 months of the fiscal year to meet that forecast. As you can see, we're doing very well so far. They're assuming only 3% growth, but year to date, we're at 8.6%. Now that's moving on its own too. More importantly, you'll see with the individual income taxes, which make up over 2/3 of your revenues, we're at 12.6% growth per date. A lot of that is driven by non-withholding. And I will say there was a huge December, but you really need to look at December and January in conjunction because of the timing of end-of-year estimated payments. But the way things are looking now, there might be an opportunity for a mid-session reforecast, which you haven't seen in a few years now. But I would expect, given that there haven't been any huge economic changes, any mid-session reforecast that might occur would be for fiscal year 26 alone. So again, that would be additional one-time resources available to you. But we are in a good position at this moment, and that's never a bad thing. Moving to the upcoming biennium that starts next July, you'll see there's $71.3 billion in general fund revenue available for you to appropriate. This includes just under $68 million of general fund resources expected to be collected in that biennium, almost $2 billion in transfer, and the $2.1 billion that I already mentioned that will be a carry forward from the current fiscal year. The forecast itself mirrors the forecast that emerged from the JABE and Gaker process this fall that essentially is a low-hire, low-fire environment. We're not expecting robust growth, but nor are they expecting at this point any dramatic changes. Governor Youngkin did include a total of about $734 million of tax policy changes that reduced the revenues available to you. I'll talk about that more on the coming slide, but that is embedded in the forecast. It would be that much higher had those changes not been proposed and assumed in the budget that is before you. In terms of the growth rates over the biennium, you can see it's just kind of a steady, just over 3% growth rate. This is far lower than the average growth if you look over the last 10 to 15 years. Again, things have slowed down. There's concern that some of the measures are moving in the wrong direction, but for now, we just have a fairly conservative forecast before you. What that translates into, and comparing to the budget you adopted last year, which is $725, it gives you about $1.2 billion above the base this year, $1.1 billion next year, and then $2.2 in the second year of the new biennium. So about $4.4 billion in new revenue above that which you need to maintain your current spending levels. I had mentioned the tax policy changes. The largest chunk relates to federal tax conformity. It's about $433 million. That, of course, is the purview of the House Finance Committee, but I think you can expect some robust discussion on that. These are all of these provisions relate to the federal H.R. 1 bill, and so the decision will be made in finance with the chairman and Chair Watts working together on what policies the Commonwealth will conform to and that which they won't. In addition to that, unrelated to conformity, but still related to federal tax policy changes, the governor had included proposals for partial deduction for overtime pay, tips, and car loan interest. You can see the impact that would have on your resources available. There's also a proposal to move to market-based sourcing for corporate income that has a negative impact in fiscal year 28, but is expected to become revenue neutral and potentially positive in the years beyond that. There is also language in Part 5 of the budget that makes permanent the current levels of the standard deduction, the EITC at the enhanced 20% refundability rate, and the elective PTET. These were set to expire under existing law, and it would make them permanent. And finally, there's language in the very back of the act which extends the data center sales and use tax exemption to 2050 and to 2055 for companies that invest over $100 billion. One final piece on the revenue side of the equation. Typically, you get budgets with unappropriated balances in the range of $10 million. House Bill 30, as it was presented to you, does leave $305 million unspent at the end of the biennium. They were trying to ensure that they maintain structural integrity in the out years. I will say that, forecasts for 4 years from now are highly unreliable, and given the standing of where you are year to date, you might not feel it necessary to maintain an unappropriated balance at that level and might look at whether those are resources available for you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Susan to start HHR.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Just starting with HHR. In the Medicaid area that's controlled by the Department of Medical Assistance Services, they have a number of forecasts. I'm sure you've heard this one before at the retreat. And the finalized numbers, it's about $3.2 billion for just the Medicaid forecast of inflation and utilization. When you add the adjustment for the health care fund, that comes up to about a total of almost $3.3 billion over those 3 years. It's in that bolded first bolded line. When you come down and you add in the children's health insurance forecasts and the involuntary civil commitment fund, it's still about $3.3 billion, but that adds a little bit more to your forecast costs. There's 2 high priority spending areas that were included in the introduced budget, and the largest one was for the increase in selected services under the developmental disability waiver. That's about 7 out of the 11 that they did a rate study on. And then there's some costs at the Cover Virginia call center that would need to be covered as well. Going to the next slide, The Medicaid spending is reduced by about $612 million through a number of cost containment strategies that are contained in the introduced bill. The largest of this is the first one, and that's eliminating the biennial inflation for a number of Medicaid providers, the largest of which are hospitals and nursing homes, and that's about $238 million in savings over the biennium. I'm not going to go through each of these. The subcommittee will be looking at them. Just want to point out, just on mobile crisis, which is a fairly new service, there's a limit on that. And it eliminates community stabilization services, which were planned as a bridge, I guess, if you will, between developing the new crisis services and the redesigned behavioral health services, which are still underway. I'll go on, unless there's questions, I'll go on to the next slide. There's a number of language amendments in the Department of Medical Assistance Services as usual. I've just put down here the largest ones that I think might be of interest to you. One would be to require hospitals that receive enhanced Medicaid payments to contract with managed care organizations with each managed care network that is in the Medicaid realm to ensure that there's sufficient access to members across the Commonwealth. And then it also requires them to retain labor and delivery units beginning on January 1 of this year. There's supplemental payment authorization for Ballot Health System, and there are a couple other smaller ones that are also in the introduced budget. And then there is a language amendment which would delay the implementation of the pharmacy benefit manager system until January 1 of 2027. We did just receive a report on that. The report had actually recommended an 18-month delay. There's also delays in implementing the redesigned Medicaid behavioral health system services until January 1 of 2027. You'll see that a number of the advocates are asking for a one-year delay. And then there's a limit on nursing facility value-based payments that gives them some additional criteria that they have to adhere to in order to be able to qualify for those payments. I'll turn it over to Amy.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. So turning to the Children's Services Act, we continue to see unprecedented growth. In the caboose bill, there's an additional $20.7 million general fund in FY 2026. And for the big bill, there's an increase of $49.6 million general fund, $14 million non-general fund, and then the second year, an increase of $86.5 million general fund and $16 million non-general fund just to fund the forecast. Because of these costs, there are a few savings items in the introduced budget. First, there's the proposed savings of $10.8 million in the first year and $11.8 in the second year to reduce the state match rate for community-based services to 71%. There's also savings of $3.4 million in the first year and $3.7 in the second to cap the private day services growth rate to 2.5. Currently, that cap is at 5%, and that was done last session. There's also a little bit of savings by eliminating the automatic inflationary adjustments for residential treatment providers. That's $1.3 million general fund the first year, $2.4 million general fund the second year, as well as some savings in DMAS. Turning to DSS, there are a few child welfare initiatives, the largest of which being $14.6 million in the first year and $18.1 million in the second year, as well as 132 positions to create a state centralized system to collect all child abuse and neglect reports. There's $3.5 million general fund and $1.5 million non-general fund each year to increase the minimum salaries for family services employees at local departments. That would raise the minimum salary to $37,000 to $55,000. There's about $600,000 general fund the first year and $2.7 million general fund the second year, along with positions to support better mechanisms for state oversight of local departments. There's also $200,000 each year to provide overtime funding to ensure that CPS workers respond to all reports of abuse and neglect for children under the age of 3 within 24 hours. And lastly, there's a little bit of savings, $6 million each year due to the underutilization of the relative maintenance payment program. Turning to SNAP, there's $43 million general fund the first year, $57.4 the second year to fund the increase in the new state share of SNAP admin costs per HR 1. I do want to note that this is $52 million less over the biennium than what DSS requested to cover both the state and the localities. There's a little over $1 million each year in some positions to fund a SNAP quality assurance team to hopefully find any SNAP payment errors before they can negatively impact our state error rate. And lastly, there's about $500,000 each year to increase salaries for SNAP quality control staff to be comparable with other positions within the agency. And with that, I'll turn it over to Zach.
All right, good afternoon. In public education, in the caboose bill, there's about $208 million in lower costs from technical updates that are listed here. Most notably, $118.8 million in savings from updating this year's enrollment projection downward by 1.4%. Based on fall enrollment data, this signals the beginning of an anticipated several-year decline in enrollment. It also includes policy proposals for $106.5 million for the state share of a 2% bonus on June 1st, and proposes reducing the amount of authorized literary fund loans by $172 million, which would allow those funds to be expended in the new biennium. For the new biennium, $1.3 billion in new spending is proposed. It's all compiled here, but there's more detail on the following slides on each. $695 million comes from general fund sources and $575 million from non-general fund sources, and that's primarily coming from the literary fund and casino gaming revenues. The bill provides $449.7 million to cover the rebenchmark cost of public education for the new biennium. This is about $400 million less than the figure that was presented at your November retreat. That lower number is in large part also driven by adjusting the trajectory of anticipated enrollment over the biennium. So for compensation, as I previously mentioned, there's the 2% bonus in the caboose bill. Also in the 26-28 biennium, there's a total of $380 million over the 2 years for the state's share of 2% salary increases at the start of FY 27 and 28 to be provided to state-recognized SOQ positions. The bill proposes an additional $299 million for the school construction grant program. About $50 million of the increase comes from updated casino gaming revenue estimates. It's an ongoing funding source. About $77 million comes from surplus FY 26 casino revenues, as well as interest that's accrued to that fund. And $172 million is supported by that hold on literary fund loans that was proposed in the caboose bill. And while we're on the literary fund, in addition to the $172 million that's freed up by the loan action in the caboose bill, one other action is proposed that would increase the amount of literary fund used to support teacher retirement costs by $285 over the biennium, which would increase the total to $635 million transferred to cover teacher retirement over the 2 years. And some other actions in K-12 include about $137 million to increase the number of child care subsidy slots by about 6,700 slots. $2 million is proposed to establish a program to incent employers to contribute towards the cost of child care. And $2.4 million is included to address costs of the current assessment system through the end of the state's current contract, but it does not include funds for additional costs that might be incurred with a new assessment system that will need to be established at the start of FY 27. So next up is Kim.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Starting off with proposals in Labor and Commerce in the caboose budget, which is House Bill 29. There's proposals of savings totaling $33.9 million in this fiscal year, which is fiscal year 26, primarily from the Go Virginia program, the previously provided funding for the development of an inland port in Washington County, and the Enterprise Zone program. I will note that House Bill 30, the new biennium, does propose an additional $35 million for the creation of an inland port in Washington County. This slide summarizes all the economic development spending for large economic development deals. It's about $58 million in the upcoming biennium. I will note on this slide, I won't go over everything in detail, but the General Assembly will be considering bills for the Eli Lilly project, Hitachi projects, and AstraZeneca projects this session. Next up, House Bill 30 in the Commerce and Labor area proposes a total of $52 million in new spending in the biennium. This is primarily driven by three things. There is a $35 million proposal for additional funding for the Manning Institute or the Institute for Biotechnology at UVA, an additional $10 million for business-ready sites, and $5 million to capitalize the Virginia Sports Tourism Program, which you all codified last year. To wrap things up for commerce and labor, there are several savings proposals included in HB 30. The two largest ones are reductions to the Go Virginia program, $4.7 million each year. There's still $25 million left for the program in annual funding. The reduction is just to reflect program utilization. And the same story holds true for the Enterprise Zone program, which was reduced by $500,000 in each fiscal year. There is still $14.3 million in annual funding left for that program. And I will turn it over to Tony Maggio now.
In the area of higher education, most of the funding in higher education is really related to technical adjustments. There's about $56.5 million of new spending. Over 80% of that is one time. You see the list below, $27.5 million to address the affordability. At the same time, though, there is language that would impose a 2.5% tuition cap for both years. And then some funding for financial aid, again, one time in the first year. And then funding to address the nursing shortage, $3.8 million only in the first year. In the area also within higher education, funding at Chev was about $18 million put at Chev. About $14 million of that was for the Workforce Credential Grant Program. There was some funding for the military survivors stipends, some funding for the virtual library. Kim pointed out the funding that was reduced at Go Virginia. It was transferred over to the Institute for Advanced Learning and Research for the GoTech item. And then lastly, in the Groundhog Day amendment, there is the elimination of the New College Institute in the second year yet again. And I'll turn over to David.
Okay. Moving on to Ag and Natural Resources, there are several large budget items related to the state's ongoing commitments related to water quality. $286 million is included for a deposit in the Water Quality Improvement Fund. They've cobbled this together from several sources. This includes the mandatory Part A and Part B deposit, supplemental general fund deposit, as well as non-general fund transfers from interest earnings, as well as the WQIF reserve. Of this amount, $279 million is going for agricultural best management practices with the longstanding policy split of 70-30 between inside and outside of the Bay projects. There is a proposed language amendment that in the future would direct the transfer of interest accrued on the Natural Resources Commitment Fund to the WQIF reserve unless the reserve has more than $70 million in funding. After the transfer I mentioned earlier, the balance of the fund would be approximately $50 million. Over at DEQ, there's $140 million included for HRSD's wastewater project. This would be one of the several projects directed by the Enhanced Nutrient Removal Certainty Fund. And there's also a proposal to fully fund the needs assessment in the first year for the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund. At DCR, there are a number of small items that I won't, and so I'll only touch on two here. There is a capital amendment that would authorize the acquisition of property in Loudoun County to establish Oak Hill State Park. It establishes several conditions before that could be effectuated. And there's also a proposed reversion of $25 million a year from the Soil and Water Conservation District Dam Repair Fund to the general fund. This would be about half of the current balance of the fund. Other natural resource agencies, there's a small reduction of $2 million a year at DEQ related to air and water monitoring equipment. There's $6.8 million included at Wildlife Resources to rebuild and repair an agency-owned dam at Lake Shenandoah outside of Harrisonburg, and two smaller funding items at DHR. Moving on to public safety and veterans. There's a total of $84.6 million between the caboose and the big bill for inmate health care expenditures. Again, we're seeing the same factors we've seen driving these cost increases in past years, so off-site medical care, pharmaceutical care, as well as increased staffing costs. At state police, there's $136.8 million in new funding over both bills for personnel and equipment costs. This would fund the cost of the 144th, 145th, and 146th trooper classes. There appears to be a mismatch between expected funding levels at state police for personnel and what they actually have, so that's something that the subcommittee will have to spend some time digging into. In addition, there's $9.3 million each year for the agency's VEDA transformation costs. At VDEM, there's language proposing the establishment of the Cardinal Disaster Relief Fund to be administered by VDEM. The language itself contains very little about how the program would operate or what the funding would be used for. And it also includes transfer language that would take $35 million from DHCD's low-income energy efficiency program. There's a total of $12 million over the biennium to support additional emergency response costs at the department, as well as $700,000 for local emergency equipment, communication equipment. And Veterans and Defense Affairs, there's $2 million for the Military Infrastructure Grant Program. And at DVS, there's a total of $10.9 million over the 3 years to support startup costs at Puller Veterans Care Centers. And I'll hand it over to Michael.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. In the area of transportation, there's $60 million general fund in the first year for transportation, $25.5 million. As y'all are aware, almost all of the bulk of transportation is funded through transportation funds. It includes $24 million each year general fund for continued funding for the toll relief program in Hampton Roads. $24 million is how much was included in 26. It was our understanding there was one-time funding one-time funding, so that we were kind of surprised when we saw it in the introduced budget, but it would continue the funding at the 26 level. The other funding is $35 million for the inland port, as Kim mentioned, for Washington County. HB 29 did revert $9.75 million from that project out of Commerce and Trade, and now the funding is put in under the port. For WMATA, there is no general fund support for WMATA in the introduced budget. In the current biennium, there was $137 million general fund provided for WMATA, And the expectation or from the region is that funding would need to be continued. In addition, there would be additional funds of about $150 million starting next year for the state and local share to increase the operating support. This last slide in transportation just shows the adjustments for the transportation revenue projections and the update of the annual 6-year improvement plan. Moving to compensation and retirement, the first slide shows the bonus in HB 29 for, as Zach mentioned, there is one for SLIQ funded positions, $106 million. In addition, there is slightly higher amount for state employees and state-supported local employees. For the total is $231 million. There's funding in both years of the big bill, HB 30, for raises of 2%, a total of $253 million in the first year and $531 million in the second year. For the Virginia retirement system, there is actually a lot of savings this year as the rates have gone down based on the fact that people continue to move into the hybrid and it's a much larger portion of the pie, and the funded status is improved based on good investment gains. So there is savings of about $100 million for the state employee plans over the 2 years and savings of $120 million for the teachers over the 2 years for the base retirement plans. There's also savings in the OPEB or other post-employment benefit plans of about almost $50 million over the 2 years. This just shows what the rates are for the VRS retirement rates. The current year is FY26, and the biennium shows that the rates have gone down, and the funded status is above 80% for the 2 largest plans. For the state employee health insurance, the introduced budget includes $99 million in the first year and $144 in the second year for a 12.9% premium increase in the first year and a 5% premium increase in the second year. It would have been higher, would have been about 20%, except for there are 3 proposed policy, plan changes that will save money to reduce it from 20% increase to a 13% premium increase. And I'll hand it off to Andrea.
Good afternoon. In capital outlay and general government, there's a total of $2 billion in general fund resources in the introduced budget. Almost $900 million of that was cash. The remainder, $1.1 billion, was general fund bonds. And that it fits within the 1.5 that was recommended from the Debt Capacity Advisory Committee. The budget does not recommend any 9C revenue bonds. Those are projects that are typically self-supporting, like higher ed dorms or dining halls. Excuse me. The majority of the general fund resources were for renovations and replacements, which is in keeping with kind of your all's priority in the last couple of years to really be focusing on care and upkeep of facilities that we already have. So as I was saying, the vast majority, almost $900 million of the general fund cash and debt combined, is in one construction pool. And so as you all know, when we fund projects in pools, we don't have individual project numbers, but rather one project for the entire pool. So the list of projects are there. It's 5 higher education projects, and then the Commonwealth Courts building, where you will see the Pocahontas building demoed starting at the end of session for that building to come up. The next largest category was new construction. All of the new construction projects were for higher ed institutions at roughly $555 million. Once again, the majority of these, or all of them, were in the construction pool, so no individual project numbers as they're funded in a project as a whole. I have the individual projects listed, but of course, if any member ever has a question about a capital-specific project, I'm happy to help. Finally, a lot of the capital projects that were in 795 are the budget that you all approved in the spring. The governor had vetoed to have a cash reserve. So this chart just compares projects that were vetoed by the governor and whether or not they are still in the introduced budget. For higher education, all but one were included, and then several of the state agency initiatives, parks deferred maintenance, HVAC improvements, were not included again. Other notable capital proposals of the roughly $900 million in general fund cash, the largest chunk of that is for maintenance reserve, which is the money, of course, that the state gives every year for agencies and institutions that own buildings for their general ongoing and upkeep. Another good news for our pipeline is that HB 30 has only 5 projects that it starts out in the beginning of the process. 3 of them are for higher ed, 2 of William & Mary, 1 for UVA, and the rest are state agencies. Other things that are notable are the typical. We have a furniture, fixings, and equipment. That's FF&E. That's a pool for projects nearing completion. There's a large chunk of non-general fund only capital. The biggest piece of that is Virginia Port Authority projects, but there's also some projects at, one at Virginia Tech, some at JMU, and then Virginia Community Colleges is using some of their cash balances for facility upgrades. Other general fund highlights. This is for general government portion. We're moving away from capital outlay here. Debt service, there's almost $50 million between the 2 years. It includes, between the 3 years, it includes a savings in 26 and then funding in 27 and 28. And of course, debt service is what we pay on bonds that we've issued in the past, usually for construction projects. The criminal fund within the court system, there's $40 million over the biennium deposited. That's where we pay for court-appointed attorneys and other critical court and justice programs. Central accounts, we have almost $40 million for the state general fund share of kind of central service charges that agencies pay. You have your statewide budgeting systems or VITA, rent, et cetera. Typically, the state picks up the general fund share of any cost differences. And then in compensation board, there was 9.2 over the biennium for 89 additional sheriff positions funded, again, through the compensation board. For the sake of time, I'll save going through some of these, but a list of some other noteworthy general government proposals, such as $10 million for judicial branch for IT initiatives. And then on the second slide, I'll just point out some independent agencies like lottery. It's a large non-general fund appropriation, but those are technical in nature. Usually we do that every year for distributions and whatnot. So I believe that brings our presentation to an end. We have record time. I could always talk about capital all day if you'd like, sir. Thank you.
Thank you all, staff, so very much. At this time, I'll entertain questions from the committee, if there are any. Delegate Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to make sure that the picture that was painted for us in the State of the Commonwealth, if it was kind of looking backwards or looking forward. So I just did have one question. If the governor included funding for the benefits cost share due to H.R. 1, and I believe if not, that would keep us on the hook for $200 million if we didn't get our error rate down for SNAP benefits.
Yeah, Delegate Price, that's correct. That funding is not included in the budget. The administration was adamant that our error rate would be below 6%. I think that would be very unlikely. So DSS did request $211 million of general fund in FY28, assuming that our error rate is still going to be above 10%. So we would have to do that 15% match.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? If not, staff, thank you so very much. Members of the General Assembly and the public, thank you for attending our briefing today. This concludes our meeting, and the committee shall rise.
Thank you. That's